Have you ever been buried in alerts? Too many signals, not enough certainty, and wondered which one is the real incident hiding in plain sight? In a modern SOC, missing the important alert by a few minutes can mean the difference between containing a threat and chasing the aftermath of a breach. In this session, you learn how Microsoft Sentinel helps you turn raw security data into actionable detections, streamline investigation, and respond faster with automation, so your team can stay ahead of real-world attack. Hello and welcome. We're glad you've joined us. I'm Jean-François Bilodeau, a Microsoft technical trainer. In this session, we'll cover create detection and perform investigation using Microsoft Sentinel as part of Learning Path 9. Together, we'll walk through how Sentinel Analytics Rule create high-quality detections, how automation rules and playbook reduces repetitive work, how incident and entity investigation come together in Defender XDR, and how data normalization and workbooks help you query, visualize, and monitor security data consistently. So let's get started with this session. Here we set the stage for defending against cyber threat using Microsoft Security Operations Platform. As we work through the session, keep in mind the goal: improving how you detect threats, investigate efficiently, and respond with confidence. Let's position this session in the broader journey. This is Learning Path 9, focused on creating detection and performing investigations using Microsoft Sentinel. The emphasis is practical, building reliable detections, reducing noise, and working incidents end to end. Let's take a look at what we'll cover. We'll start with threat detection using Microsoft Sentinel Analytics, how rules analyze data and produce meaningful alert. Then we'll move into automation in Microsoft Sentinel and how automation reduces repetitive SOC tasks. From there, we'll get into threat response using Microsoft Sentinel playbooks, followed by security incident management, how incidents are created, investigated, and resolved. Next, we'll explore entity behavioral analysis so you can spot abnormal behavior across users and assets. We'll then cover data normalization, how to query across sources consistently using ASIM. And finally, we'll wrap up by querying, visualizing, and monitoring data using Microsoft Sentinel Workbook. Let's begin with threat detection using Microsoft Sentinel Analytics, because the quality of everything downstream from investigation to response depends on the quality of the detection we create. After completing this module, you should be able to explain why Microsoft Sentinel Analytics matters, describe the different type of analytic rules available, create rules from template, build brand new analytic rules, and query using the analytic rules wizard, and then manage and tune rules through ongoing modification. Microsoft Sentinel Analytics is where detection starts to become intelligence. Sentinel analyzes data coming from many different sources and looks for correlation and abnormalities that are easy to miss when logs are viewed in isolation. When you define analytic rules, those rules can trigger alerts based on known attack techniques used by malicious actors. The outcome is simple but powerful. Your SOC gets notified of potential incidents quickly, so response starts sooner. Common security analytics use case includes identifying compromised account, analyzing user behavior to spot suspicious pattern, examining network traffic for trends that suggest an attack, detecting data exfiltration attempt, and even uncover insider threats. Microsoft Sentinel supports several analytic rule types. and choosing the right type depends on what you're trying to detect and how quickly you need to act. You may see Microsoft security rules and advanced multi-stage attack detection, also known as Fusion, though it's important to note that these two aren't available for Microsoft Sentinel instances that are onboarded to the Defender portal. Beyond those, there are machine learning behavioral analysis rule, threat intelligence rule, anomaly rule, schedule rule, and near real-time or NRT rule. Each type offers a different balance of detection approach, configurability, and timeliness. Here we focus on one of the fastest ways to get value, starting from a template. In the analytics area of Microsoft Sentinel, you'll find rule templates that are preloaded from the Microsoft Sentinel GitHub repository. These templates give you a proven starting point for detecting specific threat, so you can enable detection quickly and then tune them to match your environment. When you need the most flexibility, create a custom rule using the schedule query rule type is the way to go. This approach lets you define your own KQL, decide exactly how often the query runs, and control how alerts are generated. You can also tie into automated action by associating a Microsoft Sentinel playbook so detection and response can be connected from the start. Detections aren't set and forget. To reduce noise and keep the most important threat front and center, you need to manage analytic rules continuously. Ongoing tuning helps ensure the rules remain useful, efficient, and align with how your environment and attackers evolve. Now let's take a look at anomaly detection analytical rule. These are customizable machine learning-based rules that use entity behavior analytics and other signals. Many of the templates work right out of the box, which makes them a strong signal starting point for spotting unusual behavior. It's important to understand what these anomaly rules do and what they don't do. First, anomalies are saved to the anomalies table. Second, by themselves, those anomalies don't generate alerts or incident. Instead, they're designed to support proactive hunting for malicious actor and to correlate with other signals to help you build stronger threat detection. Finally, you can use features like fighting mode for testing and threshold setting for tuning, so you can validate behavior and reduce false positive before relying on the result operationally. With detection in place, the next step is automation, because even great alert can overwhelm a team if every incident requires the same repetitive triage step. After completing this module, you should be able to explain the automation option available in Microsoft Sentinel and create automation rule to standardize and streamline incident handling. Microsoft Sentinel supports SOAR, Security Operation Automation and Response, which is all about automating recurring and predictable enrichment, response, and remediation tasks that typically fall to your SOC. There are two primary automation building blocks to keep in mind. First are automation rules, which allows you to centrally manage and standardize how incidents are handled. Second are playbooks, which are collections of responses and remediation action and logic that can be run in Sentinel as a routine. Automation rules helps you apply consistent action to incident the moment they're created or updated. For example, you can automatically change an incident status, adjust the incident severity, assign the incident to an owner, or add a tag. These small, consistent action can significantly reduce triage time and ensure the right incident reach the right people with the right context. Next, let's shift from automating incident metadata to automating response action using Microsoft Sentinel playbooks. After completing this module, you should be able to explain Microsoft Sentinel source capability, describe what Sentinel playbooks are, create a playbook to automate alert or incident response, and run a playbook either on demand or automatically in response to an incident. Microsoft Sentinel offers a broad set of SOAR capability through playbooks and connectors. One key component is playbook templates, which gives you ready-made automation workflow you can deploy quickly to respond to threats automatically. Another building block is the Azure Logic App Managed Connector Ecosystem, which Playbook uses to communicate with hundreds of Microsoft and non-Microsoft services. And when you need to integrate with services that don't have a pre-built connector, Azure Logic App Custom Connector lets you create and define your own triggers and action. Even share those connectors across teams. To connect the concepts, think of Microsoft Sentinel as both a SIEM and SOAR solution. The SIEM side helps you collect, analyze, and detect. The SOAR side helps you orchestrate and automate responses. In Sentinel, playbooks are security workflow built on Azure Logic App that run in response to an alert or an incident. Azure Logic App is the cloud service that automates business processes, and it does that through connectors. A connector is simply the component that provides the interface to a service. Within a playbook, everything begins with a trigger, an event that fires when a specific set of conditions is met. And then one or more action runs to perform a task. A Microsoft Sentinel playbook uses the Microsoft Sentinel Logic App connector to interact directly with Sentinel data and operation. When it's time to build a playbook, you do that in the Logic App Designer. The designer gives you a visual canvas where you build a trigger first and then build out the workflow with one or more actions. This is where the Microsoft Sentinel Logic App connector becomes practical, letting your workflow receive Sentinel signal and then execute response steps automatically. There are two primary ways to run a playbook. You can run it manually from an incident when an analyst decides it's the right time to take action, or you can run it automatically by connecting it to an analytical rule so the workflow triggers as part of the detection. Once detection and automation are working, the next skill is managing incidents effectively, because this is where analysts spend their time making decisions and driving resolution. After completing this module, you should be able to explain how Microsoft Sentinel incident management works, explore evidence and entity management, and investigate incident through to resolution. Incident management is the complete process of investigating an incident from start to finish, from the moment it's created through deeper investigation and evidence gathering all the way to resolution. The key is treating it as a life cycle. Create, investigate, understand scope and impact, take response action, and then close with confidence. To understand an investigation, it helps to connect four core concepts: events, alerts, entities, and incidents. Events are the raw records, log entries, and signals. Alerts are detection generated by rules or products when something looks suspicious. Entities are the things involved: the user, the host, IP addresses, or even applications. Incident, then brings everything together by grouping related alert and entity into a single case you can investigate and manage. Here we focus specifically on incident entities, the set of users, devices, IP addresses, and other assets that are connected to the incident. Reviewing entities early helps you understand the scope quickly, what was affected, what might be compromised, and which relationship you should investigate first. Next, let's move into user and entity behavior analytics, often called UEBA, which helps you identify suspicious behavior by comparing what's happening now to what's normal for your environment. After completing this module, you should be able to explain user and entity behavior analytics in Microsoft Sentinel and explore entities within Sentinel to understand behavior, activity, and investigation context. Entity behavior analytics in Microsoft Sentinel works by building a behavioral baseline for the entities in your environment. Again, things like users, hosts, IP addresses, applications, and more. As Sentinel collects logs and alerts from connected data sources, it analyzes activity over time and across peer group to understand what normal looks like. Then, using machine learning technique, it can highlight anomalous activity and help you determine whether an asset may have been compromised. The entity behavior page is your starting point for exploring UEBA insights. You can search for a specific entity or select one from the list already displayed. Once you choose an entity, you're taken to that entities page where you can review key information and a timeline of alerts and activities associated with it. Here we focus on enabling UEBA in Microsoft Sentinel. This is where you configure the UEBA settings so Sentinel can begin generating behavioral insights and anomalies based on your ingested data and connected signals. Let's take a look at the entity timeline experience. When you encounter an entity, whether in a search, an alert, or an investigation, you can select it and navigate to the entity details page. In an investigation, for example, you would select the entity, choose info, and then select view full detail. The resulting data sheet gives you useful context, including basic fact about the entity, a timeline of notable event, and insight into behavior. Now let's talk about a challenge every SOC faces. Data comes from many sources, and each source has its own schema and field names. Data normalization is how Sentinel helps you bring consistency to query and detection across those sources. After completing this module, you should be able to understand data normalization, use ASIM, currently in preview, parsers, understand parameterized KQL functions, create ASIM parsers, and configure Azure monitoring data collection rules. The key takeaway is this: use Advanced Security Information Model, or ASIM, parsers instead of specific table names in your Sentinel query. That way, you can view data in a normalized format and automatically include all data relevant to a schema in your query. So why normalize? There are four major benefits. First, cross-source detection becomes far easier because you can look for the same behavior across different log types. Second, content becomes source agnostic, meaning detection and hunt aren't tied to a single vendor schema. Third, normalization supports your custom source by mapping them into common schema. And finally, it improves ease of use. Analysts can write and reuse queries without consistently translating field name for each table. With ASIM, instead of querying individual tables directly, you use ASIM parser to work with normalized field. The most important idea is the use of unifying parsers. These combine data from all relevant sources, normalize it to the same schema, and let you query using consistent field name. For example, for the authentication schema, you might use the IAM authentication unifying parser. For DNS, you might use the IAM DNS, and for process name, you might use parsers such as the IAM process create and the IAM process terminate. A good rule of thumb is that built-in unifying parser begin with the IAM prefix before the name of the table, while workspace deploy parser follow the IAM schema style without the underscores. Another way to make your work reusable is through parameterized KQL functions. Here we create functions that accept input parameters so you can standardize common logic and call it with different values rather than rewriting the query every time. Once the function exists, you can call it from your query just like a reusable building block. This approach improves consistency across your detection and hunts and makes it easier to maintain your query because updates to the function can flow into every query that uses it. If you need to normalize a data source that isn't already covered, you can build a custom ASIM parser. The process is structured. Start by collecting sample log, then identify which ASIM schema applies. Next, map your source events field to the schema field. From there, develop one or more ASIM parser for that source. Test the parser thoroughly, and deploy the parser into your Microsoft Sentinel workspace. After deployment, update the relevant ASIM unifying parser so that the new source is included. And finally, consider contributing your parser back so that others can benefit as well. To support data normalization and clean ingestion, it's important to understand Azure Monitor Data Collection Rule, or DCR. In log analytics, DCR defines how data flows into a workspace. That flow includes the data stream being collected, whether standard or custom, the destination workspace, any KQL transformation that's applied, and the final output table where the data is stored. You'll commonly hear about two different approaches. A standard DCR is used with workflow that sends data to Azure Monitor, such as Azure Monitoring Agent-based connectors and supported ingestion workflow. A workspace transformation DCR, on the other hand, is used directly with a log analytic workspace to apply ingestion time transformation for workflows that don't currently support DCR natively. The key concept here is transformation. In a DCR, transformation lets you filter or modify incoming data before it's stored using a KQL statement that's applied to each individual record as it's ingested. With data coming in cleanly and consistently, the final piece is making that data usable day to day, querying it, visualizing it, and monitoring it so analysis and leaders can spot threads and act quickly. Here we focus on how Microsoft Sentinel brings everything together, allowing you to move from raw log data to meaningful insight that supports both operational decision making and long-term security posture improvement. After completing this module, you should be able to visualize security data using Microsoft Sentinel Workbook and create a Microsoft Sentinel Workbook on your own. This is where all the detection, investigation, and normalization work you've done comes together in a way that's easy to consume and act on. Here we introduce Microsoft Sentinel Workbook. Workbooks provides a dashboard-like interface that lets you visualize and interact with your security data. Microsoft Sentinel includes built-in workbook provided by Microsoft as well as community-contributed options. You're not limited to those though. You can create custom workbook tailored to your organization's need, workflow, and priority. Let's take a look at how you create a new workbook. From the workbook area, you can explore existing workbook or choose to add a new one from scratch. When creating a new workbook, you start by selecting Add Workbook. To make changes, you switch to Edit mode, where you can add text, queries, visualization, and parameters. When building queries in a workbook, it's important to ensure that the data source is set to logs, the resource type is set to log analytics, and that you select the correct workspace or workspaces. Once your workbook is complete, you save it under the subscription and resource group of your Microsoft Sentinel workspace. You can also choose whether to save it as a shared report so others can use it, or as a personal report just for you. Finally, you can switch between workbook at any time using the open option. At this point, we bring everything together in a demonstration. This demonstration shows how detection, investigation, automation, and visualization works together in Microsoft Sentinel, reinforcing the concept you've learned throughout this session. In this demo, let's activate a Microsoft security rule in Sentinel. We're going to head over to Configuration, down to Analytics. From here, let's create a new Microsoft incident creation rule. Let's give it a name. We're just going to call it Create Incident based on Defender for Cloud. Optionally, we can give it a description. We'll skip over that. We'll make sure it's enabled. And as the name implies, we're going to connect that to Defender for Cloud. Whenever Defender for Cloud issues an alert, we're going to only capture those that have low, medium, or high severity. We can also specify which alerts we're interested in, which alerts we don't want to receive in our telemetry. Automated responses. We don't have any automated responses set up yet. We'll do so later on in this demo. So let's go to Create, Review plus Create. Boom, we've created our first telemetry, our first analytic rule in Sentinel. Let's get into some automation, turn our Sentinel SIEM into an actual SOAR. We're going to head down to the Content Hub and we're going to search for SOAR Essential. Just one of the package that's available for us. There it is. It's already installed. Let's manage it. And we've already got playbooks created for us. Let's take a look at this one over here. The incident task for Microsoft Defender XDR. And let's edit it. This will bring us into the Logic App Designer, where we can now determine what's going to happen when we use that workbook. We're going to connect it to Defender. We're going to need to authenticate to Defender. Let's do that right now. The two services are now connected. We're not going to add any additional step. We'll keep it as is. Let's save at least the connection we've established. And now let's move ahead. Let's head back to Sentinel, automation, and let's create an automation rule. When should that playbook execute? So we'll create a new automation rule. Let's just call it demo for now. When an incident is created, we can add conditions to the incident. Let's add a condition over here. And we're going to take a look at the tactic. If the tactic contains, and we're going to go with a number of them. Let's select reconnaissance, execution, persistence. How about command and control, and exfiltration just for the heck of it, and pre-attack. And finally, action. When the automation rule is invoked, let's have it run the playbook that we've created. Whoops, I cannot select it. Why not? Well, Sentinel doesn't have access to the workbook, but not a problem. We're going to get Azure to help us with that. Manage playbook permission. Let's select the playbook we want to use. So let's browse under the resource group where the playbook is. Apply. And let's get the necessary permission so that we can now invoke the playbook from Sentinel. Done. The rest we'll leave it as is. We'll leave it in order of one. This will be the first automation rule to execute. And boom, there we go. We've got our automation rule ready to rock and roll. Next, let's use it. All right, in this demo, let's connect Azure Activity to Sentinel, and let's create an automation rule as well as further automation. Let's go to our Content Hub. Let's search for Azure Activity. There it is. Let's manage it. And let's configure the connector. Now, Sentinel doesn't have de facto access to Azure Activity. We will need to set up permission for Sentinel to access it. So we're going to use the policy assignment wizard to help us with that, do the heavy lifting. We're going to specify the scope. We'll do that at the subscription level. Done. The rest we can leave as is. Parameter, which log analytic workspace do we want to connect? We're going to use the same log analytic workspace on top of which Sentinel is built. There's only one, that's easy enough. Select. Remediation. We'll do full remediation. Done. And Sentinel will need an identity to access Azure Activity, so we'll create a system assign manage identity. We'll give the permission to that identity. We'll store that in WES-US2. Next, we're not going to worry about non-compliance message. And let's go ahead and create or assign the policy. This will just take a moment or two. And we're done. Now, Sentinel is able to receive Azure Telemetry, Azure Activity through the log analytic workspace. So let's do a little bit more configuration. We're going to head down to Activities, Analytics. Under Analytics, let's go to Rule Template, and let's pick a sample rule over here. Let's look at New Cloud Shell User. It's a rule that's provided for us from the Azure Activity connector. Let's create a rule based on that template. The template is pretty much good to go. We'll do a couple of tweaks. We're not going to change the name or the description, but let's make the severity medium. Next. We're not going to change the MITRE attack techniques. Here's the Custo query that's written for us. We don't have to write the Custo query ourselves, but we can tweak it if necessary. We can make changes to it should we want to. We can also run it, make sure that it gives us the expected result. Right now, we're not going to get anything yet. We don't have any Cloud Shell user. We're just starting to receive telemetry from Azure Analytics. So let's move down. Let's choose when this schedule role should run. Let's make it run every 5 minutes. And we're going to take a look at the last 24-hour, last day of telemetry that we've received over here. Alert threshold. If we get just one result from the Custo query we saw earlier, let's raise an alert. And we're also going to group all event into a single alert to make sure we don't get into alert fatigue, so there's not too much noise. Incident setting. So we're going to create an incident out of our alert. We'll leave it as is. And automated response. This is the automated response that we created earlier. We'll add one later, but for now, let's just create the role. Boom, there it is. It is created. We've created our schedule query over here, which will run every 5 minutes and raise an alert and open an incident if and when a new Cloud Shell user is created. Let's edit the rule and let's add some automation, further automation to it. We're not going to change the rule logic. We'll keep it as is. Incident settings, let's keep it as is. Automated response, we'll keep the original response in here, but let's create a new one. Let's call it Tier 2. And let's use it to automatically assign ownership. And in this case, I'll just assign the ownership to me. Done. So here's another automation rule that we've created. It will be applied after our demo automation rule that we've created earlier, but it's ready to go. Let's save the changes that we've done. And there we are. So what we've done over here is we've created a schedule query. We've added some additional automation, and we've seen how we can modify the schedule query as well. Let's recap what we've covered in this learning path. We've started with analytics rule, where Microsoft Sentinel analyzes data from various sources to identify correlation and anomalies, and where you learned about the different type of analytics rules available. We then explored automation, including automation rule and playbook, which helps streamline and standardize incident handling and response. From there, we covered incident management, looking at how Sentinel supports evidence and entity management investigation workflow and incident resolution. We also discussed data normalization, including the use of ASIM parsers and parameterized KQL function, which helps you write consistent, reusable queries across your data sources. This concludes our session. There are many ways to continue your learning journey. We encourage you to watch other videos in this course or explore your favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn.